Channel here over at SubStars are now over at Odyssey. So the title from Hollywood says, "Is Disney bad at Star Wars and analysis?" Yeah, for sure, obviously. But the bigger picture is Hollywood bad at movies now? Yes, that's all one and the same. So, Hollywood Reporter writes this article, and he might as just as well admit that Disney paid him to soft pedal their recent failures with Star Wars and with everything else they're touching. And during this very long article, I could read it, but it would take like 45 minutes. Nowhere does he mention any other perspective, any other viewpoints other than his politically correct one. There's giant spots on the map of this article that are blank spots. Here there might be dragons. So the article ultimately is pointless, and he spends thousands of words going through these small and big screen failures, and he goes through the numbers and the budgets and all this. Though he focuses more on gross and not on net, because the net is not very good and the gross doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the net. The net is the bottom line. The profits or losses. Are you writing the black ink and the red ink? Which one wins in the end? And for Disney, it's red ink. And some of the fans he mentions are istophobic and intolerant, but then you get to the end of the article and you realize you wasted 10 minutes because he never talked to anyone of the people who have a difference of opinion. Any one of the people who are criticizing these shows, or simply read some articles from That Park Place, Bleeding Fool, Bounding into Comics, Smash JT, or listen to a few videos from Yellow Flash, Neurotic Geeks and Gamers, and those kind of YouTubers, and they would never do that. They hate all those YouTubers. The Mary Sue mentions them every now and then. She has a half a dozen of these kind of toxic fandom menace type of channels who, altogether have millions of people who are listening to them. So they're obviously saying something that is resonating with a certain percentage of the audience who is just doesn't like what Disney is putting out. But bigger than that, Hollywood in total is not doing very well. You can look at the stuff that has been coming out. There's a lot of films are not taking the audience with them. So he doesn't he never brings up any possible reasons why the audience isn't paying for Star Wars anymore. Just the facts that the numbers show they're not. All right, losing my voice already. So what's the point of the article? It just seems to run cover for Disney and say that the upcoming movies will turn things around, and it's better to have, because Daisy Ridley is coming out with a new movie. Yeah, it's exactly what people. By all means, Disney, please spend $250 million on that movie, plus that half of that in advertising. And he also makes the point that he thinks that these crappy Star Wars streaming movies are better than no Star Wars at all. And that's not really true, too, because there is a reputational harm that attaches to Star Wars. I don't think it's attached to Marvel as much, because people have been more forgiving about the Marvel streaming shows, and I think they got a better reception. But if the streaming shows are so bad, I think you might start poisoning the big screen. And whatever big screen comes out of Star Wars next, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to bomb, but it's not going to. It might breaking even for Disney Star Wars would be a win, but that's not really a win because that causes the reputational harm where people are looking at Disney they're looking at Star Wars, they're looking at Disney, looking at Marvel, anything associated with Disney, they go, oh, it's a dead brand now because they have gone terminally woke, and that's the reality. And like where Disney's going to be in the next 5-10 years, I don't know. Probably owned by Apple or something. So the reason he's not curious to wonder why Star Wars isn't selling is because the answer doesn't fit within his very politically correct worldview. And, he and nobody else in any of these articles ever goes, hey, how come all our mainstream Hollywood Reporter and Variety and Kotaku and IGN and probably 100 of these type of digital magazines, how come they're all like far left wing? Like everyone who works them openly identifies as left of the center, the people who own them, all the content, all the viewpoints. How come there's no balance to these? And obviously they never asked that. How come like the only vaguely right of these people are like the Bounding into Comics and That Park Place, and like there's 4 or 5 of those, and they're tiny little websites, but there's no balance. And their thing is like they're not far right. They're just kind of normal. Anyway, so he's not curious because it doesn't fit. And if he did actually explain why people are not watching the Twitter SJWs would blame him for daring to have the audacity to present both sides of a story. And there was a Mary Sue Twitter post a long time ago where one of the girls at the Mary Sue says, but there aren't, South Park, the problem with South Park is it presents two sides of the story, and there aren't two sides of the story, there's just our side. You realize you're dealing with people who are drinking the Kool-Aid. They can't admit, like, I can look at anything and go, yeah, of course there's two sides to the story. I happen to take this right of center viewpoint on most issues, but I can say, yes, there's an argument to be had on the other side of the story, and if you wanted me to argue both sides, I would do it. That's what you should learn in high school, is how to argue both sides of an issue, no matter how strongly you feel about it. Because they always say, if you don't know your opponent's argument, you don't know yours. It means you don't know the weaknesses in your own argument. And the left wing is terrified of that, which is kind of a deeper philosophical issue with the left, is why they have to censor and deplatform. Anyway, their side is correct, and everyone else is racist, even if they can never define any of these words they call you. So Disney Star Wars failed because it doesn't look like Star Wars. I mean that figuratively, thematically, and also literally. Star Wars canon was set with Han, Luke, Leia, Obi-Wan. And people look at non-white, angry girl power in new woke Star Wars and Marvel and everything else that's coming out of Hollywood, and they know something is wrong, but I think they've been programmed to have these politically correct filters that won't allow them to simply say, yeah, Star Wars isn't non-white lesbian women running around and maybe like pronoun introductions for robots or for whatever's coming out of like Hollywood and video games. Like, most people look at that and go, yeah, we don't believe any of that kind of stuff. Oh, you're phobic. That word doesn't mean the same to us that it means to you. It doesn't have the same impact, and they don't see. I can understand that all those Pavlovian response words mean something to these left-wing Twitter kids, but they don't mean anything to me or to most of us. And I understand that we have different worldviews, but the left wing doesn't understand that. They think that all those hot words as buzzwords mean as much to us as it does to them, and they don't. And they don't get that because the left wing in general cannot empathize or sympathize with a different point of view where the right wing can. There's a study that just came out where it said that right-wing people, regardless of how much higher education they attained, didn't change in their views of their ability to talk to left-wing people and be friends with left-wing people. They went through the educational system, got their degrees, and got out, and they were still willing to talk to left-wing people and be friends with them. And the study of the left-wing people was the more indoctrination they got at universities and degrees, the more intolerant they were of diversity of thought of right wing. They couldn't be friends with right wing people. It's bizarre when you lay this out black and white, and every once in a while you point it out to a left winger and they go, "Oh, something is really wrong with the left wing," and like pretty soon they won't be on the left wing anymore, which is why the left in general has to censor and deplatform. Because in the open marketplace, if we have free speech, we're going to win. We're going to bring over left wingers and bring over people in the middle over to the right. Anyway, so diversity is the woke flavor of the day, but it's not Star Wars, and it's not real. And I don't think anywhere in this article does he show original images from 77 to 83 Star Wars. Organic storytelling requires less suspension of disbelief. Yes, we accept Han and the rest are flying around on the Millennium Falcon. We know it's a cardboard spaceship, though, I mean, the special effects for 50 years ago look fantastic. But we don't accept a diverse female-led group because while the spaceship is fake, you can also picture Han, Leia, Luke, Ben in other more believable settings, whether in a car or a ship or a caravan or something going across, I don't know, Mongolia or whatever, working together for a goal that matters, because visually they look like they could be a tribe together, and that's just the reality that a lot of left-wing people feel very uncomfortable around. But a group with a black female lead, a Chinese sidekick, and a gay trans Spanish guy doesn't look like they belong together or would be trustworthy to accomplish an important goal, because people are not fungible. But globalist Hollywood has to pretend they are. But the thing is, to be fair, the people around Hollywood, they know they're not as well. They know this is propaganda. But people subconsciously don't accept this kind of stuff. And there's been countless studies and people's empirical evidence, experience, their lived experiences showing that diversity is weakness. It always has been. It's like a child would look at that and be able to point out all the issues with a group of people who have interests adverse to each other and different cultural practices and beliefs, even down to their DNA and biological expression. Yeah, they're going to be weaker if you put them together. They're going to have endless friction and conflict. And you just hear these politicians keep repeating, it's a strength, and you go, but it's not. There's no evidence that would suggest that. It's bizarre. It's a bizarre level of gaslighting that you hear these people issue these countless video game companies with that video game thing I did the other day, where the press releases that they're like, you have to have a Department of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. So that means you have to force it on people, but it's such a strength that you have to force it on people. Oh, I mean, it's a weakness. Like that tells you right there. It just takes a little bit of thought to realize, oh, something's really, really wrong here. If you have to have all these like super, I don't know, overarching groups like human resources and DIE type of stuff to control these people, to keep reminding them that it's a strength, and here are all the ways that they can't fight with each other because that's their natural inclination. It's like, oh, this is like totally artificial. Why are we doing this? Like, well, that's another rabbit hole, but not for YouTube. So there's been a ton of studies that show diversity is weakness. It's an artificial, unstable arrangement that will fall apart as soon as it's subject to any stress, because different races, ethnicities, tribes have different interests at the biological level. Race is very important, and it's much more than skin deep, and it's important. It's important not just politically and all this, but to storytelling, because people subconsciously know that when things are wrong with a story. And the bizarre thing is that it's like, why did Lord of the Rings, the books, and Hobbit, why did they stand the test of time? Why did they do so well? And the funny thing is now they're trying to, because they're pushing Rings of Power, which is a massive failure, they're trying to go back and go, oh, Lord of the Rings had some the problematic issues with Lord of the Rings. It wasn't very diverse and all this it didn't have girl power. It's like, yeah, that's what made it great, because it was organic storytelling. And you look at these Redditor mod types of soy boy cat lady weirdos who just don't understand that like organic storytelling, everything to them has to be Pravda levels of Marxism. So the thing is, there's hundreds of years of study that say exactly that it's unity, not diversity. And it's only within the past 40 years that Hollywood has been able to brainwash people into a Pavlovian herd response. So when they hear things like what I'm doing now, they do as they're trained to do, and they shout sexist and phobic, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't add anything to the argument, and it's irrelevant because it's essentially a straw man or an ad hominem, and it's literally irrelevant because you could add it to an argument or take it away from an argument, and it's not probative and relevant to the underlying argument. It doesn't add or subtract anything. It's like, well, if it doesn't, then usually you just leave it out. There's a hierarchy of how argument works, but apparently the left wing has different rules for their pet projects. And if I look at two different groups, one modern Hollywood diversity checklist and one looking like 77 Star Wars, I know the probability is that the fair, unified group has the better odds of success in any endeavor, because I know from personal experience that a group of fair people can do amazing things, and that a mixed group simply can't, because they'll just fight among themselves. And now and that's like so politically incorrect to say that. But if you want things to change, you just have to get comfortable saying this kind of stuff. And now the audience has a Pavlovian response to woke that they have learned, and it's not always deserving. But if you're talking about gambling money for a theater and getting up to go see a theater, even if a chick led flick is not absolutely horrible, you're just not going to bother anymore. People have definitely learned that. Or if they see diversity in a movie, they know it's going to suck, and they just don't bother going to the theater anymore. People don't pay to watch women as girl power leads in action films. Ripley was a rare exception. Every so often a movie can do something like that, but it only works if it's rare, when a character plays against character. But that's all Hollywood is now. Black girl magic. So they're marketing to less than 6% of the audience, and they wonder why the movies are massively failing. And the other issue is that these movies don't take place in a cultural vacuum. Hollywood is pushing diversity at a time after the diversity riots in America and Europe, and people have become aware that it's obviously not a strength, it's a weakness. If countries were all one people, they wouldn't be destroying their own statues and buildings of their own people. They destroy things that are of the other tribe. Hollywood pretends people are fungible, but we know that we're different and we are tribal. So the only people who don't really understand this are liberals, and specifically white liberals are the only group that have outgroup preference, and it's like, it's propaganda because the rest of the world is just natural and organic, but these white liberals are the only ones who pretend to have outgroup preference. Hollywood is making these globalist propaganda movies at a time when people have awakened to the fact that they want to be around their own tribe. They have no interest in seeing diversity, girl power propaganda, because in the real world, these people all hate each other. You see how long this article is, and this is it's a long article that's just paragraph after paragraph of saying nothing and trying to desperately cope for Disney. I was talking to some SJW chick on Twitter, and I said Star Wars was failing because it needed to look like 77 Star Wars, and she was shocked and said, but that was mostly white people. I said, yeah, that's Star Wars. And of course, she started calling me phobic and all that, those non sequiturs, all that nonsense. But it's not relevant. Star Wars was established by the original. No matter what woke labels you attach to it, the Alpha was 77 and the Omega was 83. For Star Wars to succeed, it has to be white. And Hollywood is just not going to do that because they're anti-white and they're mask off with their globalist propaganda. Every theme has to be diversity and European people bad, specifically blonde bad. And you'll see this in everything in Hollywood because that's their core religion, hatred of European people to the point of absurdity. Even in the recent Joker movie, which I didn't see it, but I saw a few clips of it. 3 blonde cops. So they will comically go out of their way to shoehorn in propaganda. It's like, oh, more evil blonde guys running a gang together, and the evil blonde cops putting down the little brown person, and evil, or even in Black Adam with The Rock. They're in some bumfuckistan country, and there's evil English cops or United Nations guards, but they have English accents and they're fair-skinned. And the girl has a line in there about stealing their resources from the United Nations or something in these English accents. It's like, yeah, that's you couldn't get any more heavy-handed. And what happened to the movie? It has not broken even. So they comically go out of their way to put this stuff in there. There was even that comic book by the girl from Game of Thrones. It was a 3-part feminist comic book. I think it was called Mom or something. It was all about her vagina. And the lead evil character was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, evil mastermind, but it was a woman. That's how absurd this stuff is, and when you see it, you'll never unsee it. And for a thought experiment, next time you see a commercial or a movie where the antagonist looks like you, Euro, mentally swap them for another race, for black, and ask, well, why don't they do that? How well would it be received? How would it change the perception of it? The guy who wrote this article, it would not be received well by the Twitter SJWs. This guy doesn't know how to deal with somebody like me who says you can't have a non-white lead in Star Wars and have it connect with the audience, not in this current cultural climate. And it's this climate is not going to get better. It's just going to continue to degrade. They'd ask, well, why does it matter? If it didn't matter, you would have left it alone. You would have stayed with the theme of the original. It's like you don't have to lie to me or yourself. You know it matters. That's why you changed it. And no, they're not just casting the best actors for the role. That's disingenuous nonsense, because the casting should have been for people who visibly look like the original so they could stay in the theme and the vibe of the original. But trying to explain that to them is pointless because they're so deep in an echo chamber that they panic and will personally attack you when you try to pull them out. And you look at them and it's like, okay, you want to discuss this? Can we have a discussion without straw man and ad hominem? And they go, sir, that is a bridge too far. We just don't know how to. They would just be sputtering because that's all they know. Ask them, for example, can one of the Star Wars movies look like the original? You can make the other half like diverse cancer, but just take half of these streaming shows and Star Wars movies and Marvel movies and just make them look authentic, whether it's like the comic book or like the original, whatever the artist's original intent was. Can you do that and stick to that? It's funny because I was reading like Spider-Man from the comic from the 60s, and it's like, what do you see in the Spider-Man comics? It's all blonde and red haired, and people look like me in these comics. And what you see in the modern stuff is, oh hey, the I just flipped through some modern thing. It's like some pox woman is on the cuts, painfully lame. The thing is, they don't allow some of them to be original, because it would show the truth. It would be more successful than the diverse ones. And because people hate diversity, they hate feminism, they hate girl power, all that inclusion and equity, that's cancer. Nobody's on board with that. It would be more successful, and people then would juxtapose the two, and they'd start to wonder, well, wait, why is Hollywood making something that's literally propaganda when the audience is clearly telling you they want things that stick to the original? Not all things are for all people, and when you swap out authentic characters for Larry Fink checklist characters, you create stories that nobody can get invested in because they're not organic, so they just don't watch. And Hollywood is seeing that right now. Tell a story about set in Chinese fantasy land setting, but replace some of the characters with Africans and Europeans, and it just becomes absurd. The Swedish were not building the Great Wall. I assume the Han were. Race matters, and it matters to Hollywood as long as it isn't European. Then, for some magical reason, it doesn't matter, because as you're starting to suspect, they just hate the European people. So you see how long this article is. And it's gotten so heavy-handed that people are starting to notice it. And you can read the article yourself. It's a ridiculous waste of time to write something and ignore any other perspective. Follow me here. You have the themes of the original. If you depart from that to push your own globalist political worldview, then you have literally made propaganda, and the audience is not watching it. And it's so fake that even the left wing won't bring themselves to watch it, which is the real question these left wingers should have for all these streaming shows, these mainstream movies, all this woke crap that is literally made for them. Well, how come they're not ponying up to the theater to get their popcorn and support this woke cancer? Because subconsciously it just doesn't excite them. It doesn't connect them. It's not an organic story. People are not fungible cogs in a globalist machine. We're tribal. So when they made Blue Beetle, and it was about some Mexican family or something. Okay, so why didn't you swap the Mexicans out for Germans and blacks and make the bad guys Chinese, etc.? Because it's absurd. It's a story about one group of people. Yeah, I totally respect that. Tell the Mexican story. Be authentic. I've never read Blue Beetle. If that's the original story, for sure. But you have to do that with the European characters as well. And again, they look at you like you're crazy. Anyway, and how come there's nobody like me writing for the Hollywood Reporter? Nobody who's as far right as they are far left. And you can hear me, I'm not that far right. I'm a normal person from a few decades ago. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and I would, if somebody like me was writing for the Hollywood Reporter, holy shit. It would be a popular article. It would probably make a lot of ad revenue, and it would get a lot of death threats on Twitter because of somebody criticizing. It's just kind of to say the things I'm saying would literally get death threats if it was going out to a left-wing audience. That's how mentally ill they are. And as well as the owners of Hollywood Reporter would also get threats, because that's how these people are out of their effing minds. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys all next episode.